Hello friends. The Government of India Act 1858 was one of the most important piece of legislation in the Indian history. The reflection of that was seen in the later on acts such as the Government of India Act 1919 and 1935. Along with it, the present constitution also reflects some of the feature of the 1858 Act. It was brought because of the failure of the East India Company and as a repercussion of the revolt of 1857. So in this video, we are going to study about the Government of India Act 1858. Through this act, considerable changes were brought to the administration in India. Welcome to SRIRAM's IAS UPSC Prep channel. Let's dive deep in our video. And before that, I would like to tell you about the one-to-one mentorship of SRIRAM's IAS. This is free of cost. And if you have any doubt regarding your preparation, you can come to our expert mentors and talk to them about the doubts which you have. So let's dive deep and see what Government of India Act 1858 is all about. So a little bit of background of this act. If you see the revolt of 1857, जिसको बहुत important क्रांति मानते हैं. Some people also say this was the first war of independence of India. But India wasn't united as was seen in the later periods, such as in the non-cooperation movement or in the civil disobedience or the Quit India movement. But still, this was one of the major event which took place against the British rule, against the rule of the East India Company, against the bad governance, political and military governance of East India Company and the doctrine of lapse, where they were annexing any princely state which come into their way. So as a repercussion of this revolt of 1857, the Government of India Act 1858 was brought and the Indian administration was directly handed over to the British Crown, directly handed over to the British government. East India Company, it was just a private company which got the charter to trade with India, and slowly it got the powers in India, the territorial power, the power of police and military, the power to collect taxes. And with all those powers, they were doing nothing except exploiting the Indian people. And they finally started to revolt against the forces of East India Company. So revolt of 1857, failure of East India Company's rule. Now, when the failure took place, the British government thought that these guys who were there in the East India Company were becoming rich day by day. They garnered huge wealth, and that is one of the other reason why the British government wanted to have that kind of profit which East India Company had. That is another reason why they sort of sidelined the East India Company and directly came into India to rule. Passed in August of 1858. So August of 1858 and November of 1858 comes the Queen's Proclamation. And there are several things which were said. We will study about the Proclamation also. An act for the better government of India. Now, why are they saying this is the better government? Because what East India Company was giving Indians was nothing but exploitation. And that is the reason why 1858 Act was called by the Britishers as a Good Governance Act. But the history tells us it was not for our good governance. It was for very systematic exploitation of India. After 1858, the Britishers did not stop. They kept exploiting India in whichever way they can. And earlier it was the East India Company, a private company. But later on, this was the direct rule of the British government. One of the most black event in the history of the world, this colonized period where one country takes over the other country, exploits its resources for the betterment of its own country. It marks the start of the British Raj. If you talk to people of that period, they used to call it Raj. Raj word से जाना जाता था British Raj. What were the main provisions? Now, these provisions are very important for your examination. One by one, we will study about these provisions. Abolition of the East India Company, तो बहुत basic provision है. The powers, territories, revenues, all of these went to the crown. जो भी इंडिया में पावर गार्नर की हुई थी ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी ने, टैक्स लेने की पावर हो, पुलिस की पावर हो, किसी भी तरह की पावर हो, टेरिटोरियल पावर्स हो, जुरिस्डिक्शंस हो, टेरिटरीज, जो भी टेरिटरी जीती हुई थी एनेक्सेशन के बाद, एनेक्सेशन का मतलब होता है कि अपनी फोर्स लेके जाना और किसी भी एक प्रिंसली स्टेट को अपने अंदर जोड़ लेना, झांसी, सतारा, ये सब इसके एग्जाम्पल हैं और ये सब रिवोल्ट के लिए उठ खड़े हुए थे। और जो भी रेवेन्यूज ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी के हैं वो सारे के सारे अब क्राउन के हो गए। सो ऑल द प्रॉपर्टीज, all the powers, all the territories which belonged to the East India Company now belongs to the Crown, the British Crown. Secretary of State for India. Now this Secretary of State for India was nothing less than a cabinet post in Britain. Can you imagine? Cabinet ministers are the most important ministers, and India was such a wealthy colony of Britain that they wanted to create a post of a cabinet minister in their cabinet, and the post was known as the cabinet minister, the Secretary of State for India. He was directly responsible for the governance of India. He can sue and he can be sued. Now what is this? He can sue and he can be sued. If you see the liability clause today, the government can charge you and put a case against you, and at the same time if government did something, you can file a petition in the court against the government also. That is what is, the government can sue you and you can, the government can be sued. So this provision comes from 1858 Act. The Secretary of State can sue and the Secretary of State can be sued back. So he was the cabinet minister, the Secretary of State for India, a very important post created, and he was assisted by the Council of India. This is important. He had this 15-member team who were sitting in Britain, all having experience about India, and they were helping the Secretary of State for India in the matters. But Secretary of State for India have the overarching powers. This council was only advising, it was an advisory body. Whatever advice it gave did not have a binding force on the Secretary of State. So Secretary of State indeed was a very powerful person. Governor General to Viceroy. So earlier, whoever was there, the head of the East India Company administration was called as the Governor General of India. It was, the Governor General of Bengal first, then the Governor General of India. These three big provinces of Bengal, Madras and Bombay, they all came under the Governor General of India. William Bentinck became the first Governor General of India, and this change, this centralization came in the Charter Act of 1833. Before that, it was the Governor General of Bengal who was looking after the affairs. But this Governor General post turned into Viceroy. What is Viceroy? Viceroy is the representative of the crown. That is what is Viceroy. Now Lord Canning becomes the first Viceroy. So Bentinck was there. He was the Governor General of Bengal, and in 1833 the same person became the Governor General of India. Similarly, Lord Canning was the Governor General of India, but he also became the first Viceroy in 1858, and from there on the post of Viceroy went forward. The Court of Directors and the Board of Control was abolished. Now Court of Director and Board of Control, you must have heard these terms. ये सब कहाँ सुने आपने? Companies Act में सुनेंगे, आप सुनेंगे जब किसी भी कंपनी का, किसी भी कॉर्पोरेट हाउस का एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन चलता है तो उसमें बोर्ड ऑफ डायरेक्टर्स होते हैं, कोर्ट ऑफ डायरेक्टर्स होते हैं, बोर्ड ऑफ कंट्रोल होते हैं, एंड ऑल दीज थिंग्स वर देयर इन द ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी. भाई ये तो प्राइवेट कंपनी है, कॉर्पोरेट कंपनी है, एंड दैट इज द रीजन व्हाई इट हैड कोर्ट ऑफ डायरेक्टर्स एंड द बोर्ड ऑफ कंट्रोल. जब गवर्नमेंट सीधा रूल करती है तो सेक्रेटरी ऑफ स्टेट डेजिग्नेशंस बहुत अलग होते हैं. So all these things were abolished because the East India Company was abolished. So all the civil and military administration came under the crown. So all the powers, all the civil and military administration which was in the hands of the East India Company directly came under the hands of the crown. So this act marked the direct rule over India by the British Crown. Now, on 1st of November 1858, the Queen's Proclamation came. So the Queen of England, that time Elizabeth, had proclaimed something and they have promised something, and the promise was, in Allahabad, this was announced by Lord Canning, the first Viceroy of India, that the Queen has proclaimed several things, and she has said several things, which is no interference in religion. Earlier, the East India Company used to do this. Now, the British Crown have understood that any kind of interference in the religions of Indian will amount to revolt, and hence religion should not be interfered in. Religion is the personal matter of Indians and let it be. We are not going to interfere in religion. Even the reforms which were done, such as William Bentinck has abolished the practice of sati, it was not taken positively by the Indians. So, that's a negative example, but there are positive examples also, where the Indian masses have actually revolted because the Britishers were interfering in the religious practices here. Now, equality before law regardless of race and religion. Now, this equality before law, that simply means whatever law which was made for India by the British Crown or by the the Legislative Council or the Executive Council of the Governor General or the Viceroy in India, all the Indians will be treated equally before it. There shall be equality before law regardless of race and religion. That simply means they are not giving prominence to any one race, they are not giving prominence to any one religion over the other. Although later on they do imply some of the policies and the doctrine of divide and rule by giving separate electorate on the basis of religion. But in a broader sense, it was their policy that there shall be equality before law and there shall not be any kind of discrimination on the basis of race and religion. Then protection of the princely state. They have understood the importance of princely state. There were many princely states in India which have actually helped the British Empire during that time, during the 1857 revolt. Many of them were with the British. They were not, all of them were not against the Britishers. If they would have been, India would have freed during that time, but the help came from the princely state. And the revolt of 1857, the major contributing factor was the policy of doctrine of lapse or the policy of annexation. अगर आप उनके साम्राज्य को लेकर ब्रिटिश क्राउन के अंदर जोड़ देंगे तो वो तो रिवोल्ट करेंगे ही, and that is the reason why protection was given to the princely states and protection was given to their rights, the right to rule, the right for self-determination. And that is the reason आप 1858 के बाद नहीं देखेंगे कि ब्रिटिश किसी भी प्रकार का एनेक्सेशन कर रहा है. कोई एनेक्सेशन नहीं कर रहा. जितनी टेरिटरी है उतने से ही काम चलाएंगे. But then what will the princely state do? Were they free of the British rule? No. They accepted the suzerainty of the British Empire. They accepted the overlordship of the British Crown. Public offices were open to Indians in principle. That means that Indians will now be eligible to apply for the post such as the Indian Civil Services, the Indian Police Services, and these posts were open to the Indians. That is one major change which was brought by the proclamation by the Queen. Now, what was the impact? There are political, military and administrative impact of the 1858 Act. And what are these? If you look, direct crown rule. Now, this direct crown rule, in one way it was called as the act of good governance in India, but was it? The crown, which had immense power in its hand, the power of military, navy, army, all kind of powers, and a huge political class, a huge civil services, they were now together exploiting the Indian resource for their own good. So that was the political change which came. It was the direct crown rule, centralization of power in London under the Secretary of State, who was a cabinet minister. And the provincial government, such as what will happen to the state governments, the provincial governments of Bengal, Bihar, Odisha, Madras, United Provinces, Northwest Frontier Provinces, Bombay, all these were under the control of the Viceroy. There were governors which were appointed by the Viceroy, and all these provincial governments were directly under the control of the Viceroy through the governor. Military impacts, more European in army. Now they have understood that there was a mutiny, isn't it? You must have heard about Mangal Pandey and other people who were the soldiers in the British army, but they have mutined. There was a huge mutiny. So to avoid that mutiny, they have invited more Europeans to join the armies in India, and there was separate regiments also. Their reflection can be seen today also to prevent the future mutinies. And these separate regiments, they were made on the basis of different castes. A Mahar regiment was there, Jat regiment was there. There were other regiments as well, and these regiments were there, and it was an element of dividing the forces. It still continues today, but the sentiment and the feeling and the patriotism towards the country is altogether different. But that formula which the Britishers gave that time still continues in army. At that point in time, they have divided the army in such a way that Indians must not unite. All these soldiers must not mutiny in future, and hence they have created and crafted the regiments in such a way that one regiment can be called in to attack the other regiment if the need be, and that is the reason why they created the regiments on the basis of caste. Then administration, if you look into the administrative changes which brought in the civil services, this is one of the most important part, the steel frame of India. Through this, the administration of the British Empire was governed in India, and the civil service came directly under the control of the Britishers. So these were several changes which were brought by the Act of 1858, a very important, prominent act and an event in the Indian history which has made many changes, and again its reflection was seen in the subsequent acts of 1909, 1919, 1935 and also in the Indian Constitution. So thank you very much for joining me in this video. I will meet you in the next video. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.